17 minutes to 1 o'clock. Yesterday, Conservative leader Stephen Harper released his party's election platform. It contains some measures to help the manufacturing and aerospace sectors, but there were no dramatic measures to stem a faltering economy. When asked about Canadians' fears over the global market meltdown and how it might affect their homes and jobs, Harper said he is aware that Canadians are worried, but he said we are on the right track. Canada's banks are strong, he said, and the country is creating more jobs than it's losing. And Harper went on to say people should consider looking for bargains in the stock market. The opposition parties are jumping on the comment, saying Harper is out of touch and insensitive to the plight of Canadians. You have to wonder whether this is an approach that reassures Canadians just days before they go to the polls or turns them away from the Harper Conservatives. Joining us to talk about this is Ken Chapman. He's a lawyer and policy analyst with Cambridge Strategies in Edmonton. Welcome back, Ken.
How are you?
I am fine, thank you. What is the strategy behind the late release of the Conservative election platform, do you think?
They didn't want to do it at all. What their plan was to go and get through the election without having to do a policy platform so they could do whatever they wanted after the election.
But is that unusual?
Totally unusual.
And so why would they have implemented a strategy like that?
Because they have a chance that they'd be able to beat the other parties without having to win the election themselves.
And how would they do that? Why would they feel so confident in that way?
They had internal polls. They had polls that were saying that they were doing a wonderful job, that the leadership of Harper was way ahead of everybody else, and Dion was in trouble with his own party, that Harper had lots of money, and the Liberals had very little, if any, money, and the time to go was early. They also they knew that this financial crisis was coming, and if they could get to the polls and get past the election before the financial crisis hit and they got a majority government, they'd have carte blanche. So it was all well laid out in a considered strategy. In fact, when you listened to Harper's speech yesterday, he said they knew this was all coming from August of 2007. So they've been planning this for quite some time.
And do you think that perhaps some Conservative strategists are having a change of heart now?
I think they're having heart palpitations now.
And at what point do you think things changed?
24 hours after the English debate, Harper had showed that he didn't have the kind of empathy for people, and he was cold.
And they were picking that up on rolling polls already, right after the debate?
Right away they were picking it up, yeah.
And what do you think of how the Conservatives have responded since then? For example, Harper's comments about the economy yesterday, for example, and that interview that he did with Peter Mansbridge on the National last night.
I think it's pretty much the normal course. We're not going to change. We know what we're doing. We're the best. Stay with us. They're not going to panic. They've accused the other people of panicking already, which they haven't. And they have to just look like they're staying the course. And, in fact, they are staying the course. Releasing of the policy, it really is a brochure. It's got 22-point type. There's very few things in it, and it's mostly pictures. It was obviously a rush job, and it's all the announcements that they've done over the last little while. And the speech that he gave was all about the economy. He didn't mention the environment. He didn't mention the social plights that are going on. He didn't integrate any of this stuff, and he didn't mention anything about climate change, for example. So he's got a very, very narrow and quite shallow perspective on what's going on right now, and he's working on the fact that the people have so far said he's going to be the best manager of the economy and the best leader. Now, as you know, campaigns matter dramatically, and this has been a dramatic shift in people's consciousness. Now, will he lose this election? It's hard to say. I think that you'll find that his core vote, who may have been ticked off with him on this, on the fundamentalist side and the social conservative side, will now show up because he's in trouble. They might have stayed home before. So he will have the most efficient vote, and he will have the easiest chance of getting out his vote. The other parties now are all trying to figure out how do the undecideds and how do the soft votes in the Greens, the Liberals, and the NDPs go.
It's interesting that you say that he very definitely wanted to focus almost exclusively about the economy, but it's interesting what he's saying about it. He's basically saying stay the course. He's not talking about big interventions. What else, honestly, could he do as the current prime minister? Because isn't he meant to be reassuring Canadians and not stirring the economic pot, which is already a cauldron of uncertainty at this stage of the game.
Well, that's exactly right. But he didn't do that. He identified rather instead with the investors, saying the stock market is fine, don't worry about it. Our banking system is fine. We're not in the same problem that the United States are in or the world is in. The rest of the world is in the same problem we are. So there may be no holes in the hull of the ship of state, but he's missed the fact that there's a tsunami coming from our largest market that's going to swamp the boat. And he hasn't caught on to that. He hasn't related to individual Canadians and ordinary Canadians where they live and where their anxiety is. In fact, it's, saying there's bargains out there, go and invest in the stock market. It's a little bit like George Bush after 9/11 say, go shopping.
Well, if the Conservatives do think that they should adjust their strategy with less than a week to go, do you think there's still time to do that effectively?
Yes, I do. I think that they've got to show a broader base. They've got to show a more integrated approach, and I think that Harper has to show that he has actually got some empathy for ordinary Canadians and ways that are going to identify. He's starting to do that by talking about his mother's concern over her savings. He's trying to not show the PR soft image of the sweater vest, but to show that he actually gets it. This election will be decided over the Thanksgiving weekend. People will start paying attention to it Sunday night and Monday, as they reflect on what they want to do and start making their minds up. The same thing happened in the Alberta election, is that people made up their minds on the weekend before the vote. Same thing's going to happen to this way across the country, save and except for Quebec. Quebec's already made up its mind.
And you think that they're likely not to change it again?
Well, I think that women and youth are going to be really key to where they go and how they change. You're seeing that the transfer now is that older people and higher income people are moving away from the Conservatives and towards the Liberals to the point now that they're equal. Anybody who says they know how this election is going to turn out is self-delusional again. This is so fluid. But there are going to be some shifts and some transfers, and I think that you'll see some very strategic voting in Edmonton and Calgary as well. I think that you might see people who are wanting to send a message to Harper that you can't, giving him 28 seats in Alberta is not going to be a good thing anymore. I think you might find some very interesting surprises coming out of Alberta too. And
which ones are you going to be watching on election night?
Calgary Northeast, there's an independent Conservative running there. Edmonton Centre, Anne McClellan's machine is behind the Liberal candidate there, Jim Walkowicz. Linda Duncan is clearly in play with Rahim Jaffer. I think Liberal votes are strategically going to vote for her there, and NDP votes are going to vote Liberal in Edmonton Centre. And I think you've got an independent Conservative in Sherwood Park here, a fellow by the name of Jim Ford, who is a high-quality candidate who is very angry with the federal Conservative Party, and their board, almost all of their board quit, and they ran him as an independent candidate.
And just before you go, Ken, there's also that other matter that is now before the courts. You've been keeping your eye on the Democracy Watch court application. What effect, if any, do you think that could have in this election?
I don't think it will have any because they came in too late. It's an interesting application. The courts have already said they've deferred the decision on it and dealing with the matter on its merits until after the election. They tried to get it handled before. I think it's not a spurious or a superficial kind of application. I think it's a very serious application. In other words, was this election called consistent with the law? But the courts have said it's a difficult question. We're not going to decide that in 24 hours or over a coffee. We really have to seriously consider it. So it may be academic after the fact.
I know you've been involved in many elections, some of them real cliffhangers, right down to the wire. What do you think will happen on Tuesday night?
I think you're going to get a hodgepodge. I think you're going to get a minority government. We just don't know who's going to form it. Who's going to be a Conservative or a coalition between Liberals and NDP.
Could that be decided as early as Tuesday night? Like, could the Liberals and New Democrats, if that were a possibility, could they get together as soon as Tuesday night? Before?
No.
Yeah, they'd have to go see the Governor General.
Yeah, there's a formal. They'd have to do an awful lot of soul searching amongst themselves and see what they wanted to do. But if there's a minority government, Harper will presume that he will still be the government because he was the government on a minority basis, unless he actually loses it. I don't see that happening. But I think you're going to find there's a possibility of more than one minority government at play here. And it'll be the question, do they let Harper stay the minority government through all these tough economic times? The reality is, after October 14th, you're going to be in for 12 to 18 months of constant campaigning. This campaign has just started. It's getting ready for the next election.
Good to talk to you, Ken. A very exciting next few days indeed.
Good talking to you.
That's Ken Chapman. He's a lawyer and policy analyst with Cambridge Strategies in Edmonton. Check out his blog at ken-chapman.blogspot.com. In the meantime, tell us what you think about what he had to say. 1-800-461-9219 or send us an email to wildrose@cbc.ca. A Catholic school division in Lethbridge has decided not to